Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session all about the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. I'm John Ellerton, Head of Futures at BT Media and Broadcast, and also Chair of SMPTE UK. And I'm joined today by Ian Trow, who is Media Network and Security Technical Consultant, and he's also heavily involved in training at SMPTE. And I'm also joined by Bruce Devlin, who is known as Mr. MXF, and is also VP of Standards at SMPTE.
And so I'm here to take any abuse that you have about SMPTE standards. If you want to blame me for anything, please come up to the stage. Don't be shy, especially you, Ben. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Point your fingers and shout. That's what we want at this session.
Okay, so what is SMPTE? We've got a little diagram here. SMPTE is built on three things. It's built on standards, it's built on education, and it's built on membership. And these three things are all three means of networking.
John, I don't think those are the official SMPTE versions of those colours.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. So what we're going to talk about today is how is SMPTE relevant to keeping pace with changes in this industry? Fundamentally, SMPTE is not just another industry group. It's set up for the members, by the members. You join as an individual, and you participate as an individual. And if you're fortunate, your employer might join as a sustaining member, but all the work and the benefits are enjoyed by the nominated individuals themselves. So we're here today as SMPTE UK. SMPTE globally is an organisation of several thousand engineers. SMPTE UK, there are several hundred of us. So let's make a start and let's talk about standards.
Standards, my favourite topic. Thank you, John. So I want to do a little bit of audience participation here. So has everybody got a right hand? Put your right hand up if you have a right hand. Okay, that's nearly everyone who's listening. Good, right? Some attention's being paid. Right, okay. Now, SMPTE does technology. That's one of the T's in technology, if you look at our new words. So, I want you to put your right hand up if you could tell the difference on a piece of kit between an SDI connector and an IP connector. Okay, raise your hands if you think you could do that. Can you tell the difference between a BNC and an RJ45? We're in deep doo-doos here. I think we're at the wrong presentation. Okay, that might be a bit difficult. Put your hands up if you think you know why it's important to know the difference between those two connector types. Yeah, one person who realizes that even if you jam the cable in with a massive hammer, it's not going to work unless you plug the right plug into the right socket. So if you forget everything else about SMPTE, the one thing that we have set the standards for the last 106 years is what shape plugs and sockets you have to put together to make the industry work. Okay, that's like every standard we've ever done for the last 100 years up until about 2018. Okay, from that point you can sleep. Okay, next one. Put your hand up if you know the difference between high dynamic range and standard dynamic range. Even if you just know there's a button on your TV. Okay, 4. That's much better. Okay, I'm starting to understand what the audience is like here, guys. Okay. Put your hand up if you know the difference between stereo and Dolby Atmos or MPEG-H or DTSX. Oh, I think that everyone's audio in the audience. Nobody's got a clue what I'm talking about other than that. Okay, I think we need a bit more audience engagement here. I think they're all going to sleep. Right, now this time I want you to stand up. Stand up if you know the difference between a text file and a video file.
Come on, guys, stand up.
We go. Oh, right.
There you go.
Okay, right. I think this is what engagement means. Right, you can sit down again now. Okay. Modern SMPTE standards. Stand up if you think you could tell the difference between JSON, YAML, and XML. Oh, one,
Hey.
two. I'd be really upset if you didn't stand up. Okay, you can sit down again. And last one, anybody know how to configure a Kubernetes cluster remotely using SSH? Oh. Well, that's a shame, because that's what you actually need to know to run a modern cloud-based environment. And one of the things about SMPTE is the modern standards that we're setting are all about how you work in the cloud, how you work in IP, how you actually do everything remotely and virtualized. And very few people know about the standards, but more importantly, people don't know how to use the standards. So I wondered, Ian, could you tell us a little bit about what we might do to try and bring some education to the world?
Well, I think it's ironic that it's raining so heavily, but that's the wrong kind of cloud. And I think one of the points that Bruce brings up is very interesting. You know, cloud technology, secure sockets, you know, all of these microservices and virtualization. That really is a key thing for anyone who's interested in doing broadcast video at the moment. But the difficult thing is that it's actually a subtle mix of business, broadcast and media, and enterprise. And I think that's what makes it difficult.
And a bit of luck, and reading the right thing at the right time. But yes.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that for many people, I mean, if you look at all of the exhibits here that you've got around us, 5-10 years ago, this would have been a very, very different show, where it would have essentially been products, perhaps a few appliances, a few servers, but by and large what you're talking about here is applications, and people talking about applications, particularly in the production environment, that are actually going to be cloud hosted. So I think that, you know, sort of what we've just been through, and a lot of people are finding this quite a strange event to come to, where we're actually socializing. It's sort of like a mini IBC. But I mean, what's slowly happened in our industry is that whereas in the production area, cloud was getting a certain dominance, it's now firmly established. And I think the points that Bruce raises is that one of the things that really is a problem for the broadcast industry is proprietary aspects of it. And that's what we're getting at here. The technology, by and large, is out there to actually use the cloud, put applications, put it on COTS-based infrastructure. But one of the things that the industry needs is standards and best practice.
I was talking to a guy who had recently completed the implementation of a large ST2110 facility. And I was quite horrible to him, actually, because there was probably about a couple of hundred people on this webinar. And I said to him, what would you do differently if you did it again to improve your success rate? And that was a bit evil, because it implied that he didn't have a success rate. But he was very honest. He said, I wish I'd trained my staff more. He said, we put in the budget enough money to train the 12 members of staff, not only who were designing, but who would be using the facility on day one. They ended up training one person, and that person left before the system went live. And the big thing that he figured out was that if they'd done all that training up front, they might have knocked about 6 months off the total deployment of that one specific, build, and it was a 2.5-year build. So, as a person who's actually made a training course, Ian, what are we trying to teach people?
I think it's actually promoting general awareness. In the broadcast and the media area, people tend to come from two different disciplines. One of them's the media and the broadcast area, and one of them's the IT and the infrastructure area. And I think that means that it's a very, very unique skill set for people who understand what's needed from a standards and a best practice perspective. So, I mean, in terms of training, I think that even if you ask the question of what the cloud means to people and constructing a training course, there are various different takes on it. We're all essentially technologists, but we wouldn't survive in the job market, particularly when it gets aggressive when you get older, and dare I say into your 50s. You've actually got to, you've actually got to retain some technical skill set. And so for the cloud, a lot of that training is about technology. But I think that one of the things that really surprises a lot of people is for cloud-based deployment, I'd actually say that the discussion doesn't start with training about technology, doesn't even start about training for standards or best practice. It's about the business case. It's really about understanding where particular applications fit, where there's a good fit with the infrastructure, and a lot of the time what the corporate goals are that you're trying to achieve. And I think that's one of the things that makes the industry that we work in very, very interesting now, because when we were all younger, it was about designing kit that was at the cutting edge. And I mean, it was basically, can it do it?
Build it and they will come.
Absolutely.
Not so much anymore.
No. And I mean, I think now the equation's completely flipped on its head now, that a lot of the time the assumption is we will cloud host this, and you will have an edict from your business directors or corporate goals that will basically say, this has to be cloud hosted, make it happen. And I think that that's where organizations like SMPTE and others like DPP, EBU and so forth, that's where it gets really interesting, because there is no doubt the cloud has been developed for enterprise applications, and everyone's got a device that can access social media with a host of apps. But nonetheless, the apps that are actually run media are really testing those limits. There's a reason why there are sort of different deployment rates for essentially file-based production as opposed to live or outside broadcasting. And I think that what you're finding now is really understanding, and for us teaching you about what the cloud means for those kind of media environments, and teaching you the difference between the playbook and workflow for episodic and cinematic, as opposed to, well, I mean, what better outside broadcast venue than Twickenham? But it is very, very different. And so I really think having a strong appreciation of what you're actually trying to achieve from a workflow and what you're expecting from cloud hosting.
So an interesting comment that was made to me a while ago was, hey, we've got open source, we don't need standards anymore, which I thought was interesting, possibly a religious view rather than a technology view. But they did make a good point, that they could basically build a cloud infrastructure on Amazon with nothing more than a credit card and reading the documentation a bit and put something together. And by and large, that's true. In fact, I'll do another Ask the Audience. Has anybody actually done a cloud workflow, either your own or someone else's? Anyone in the audience? Just raise your hand if you've done some work in the cloud that's vaguely broadcast related. Just me. Oh, 1, 2, 2.5. So one of the interesting things was, if you get it working beautifully in Amazon, and you then try to move it across to, say, Azure, and according to the guys in Microsoft, it's pronounced Azure like a sneeze, and not Azure comme les Français. Just in case you're confused there. So if you try and move your Amazon workflow to Azure, you pretty much have to start again. Just about every aspect is different, including how you describe media in each individual cloud. So if you've got an Amazon native asset that you're using in the Amazon ecosystem, and you want to move it across to Azure, it's described a completely different way. So one of the things that SMPTE tried to do was have an ontology working group. Now, if that doesn't set your pulse racing with excitement, I don't know what does. So we got a bunch of really excited librarians into a room and tried to get them to agree on a vocabulary for how to describe assets. Just going to let time fill the void there, because that work is still ongoing. We're trying hard to actually get some results there, but it's really difficult. Because it's very difficult to get 50 smart people in a room, give them a problem where everybody has a strong, almost religious opinion on it, and then get them to agree on something and write it down. So unless we intervene here, that work will never finish. And one of the things that I have a bit of hope for, and I'm going to turn to John here, is that some of the best designs in SMPTE, nay, the industry, have been sorted out with peanuts and beer at section events. Because literally, that's where you figure out the compromise, and then you go back into the committees and then try and explain to the committees why the person drinking wine thought up something that was good rather than just being a complete idiot. So John, tell us a little bit about how we might get back to that world again.
Thank you, Bruce. So yeah, SMPTE is about much more than standards and education. It's also significantly about networking. It's about getting together over a beer. And in the UK, what we're doing here is reinvigorating the UK section. And it's all about meeting up, mostly for real, in a pub or at somewhere like BBC Research and Development, and spending time together. And we'll have a talk of some kind or a panel discussion. But people like Bruce will be present.
We should do the audience participation again. Stand up if you've been in a pub in 2021. One. Two. God, we have an audience of party animals. Sorry, right. This is looking good, John.
Excellent. At least they recognise what a pub is. Let's put my UK slide up. Here we go. So this is kind of partly what this presentation is all about, really, which is to say, we've told you a bit about what SMPTE is, what SMPTE does, but SMPTE is nothing without participants. So we're starting to meet up again. Our first meeting in the UK is on September the 22nd, and we're meeting in a pub. It's that one, bottom left. It's right in the middle of Soho, the Crown and Sue Chairman on Dean Street.
You should all be leaping for your diaries at the moment and writing September 22nd in a pub with humans.
And the topic, well, it's quite straightforward, really. What on earth happened in our industry over the past 18 months whilst we were all in our back bedrooms? Because actually, a lot has moved on. There's a lot of cloudy stuff that's happened, right? So let's get together and let's talk about this. And we've got a panel of people who have done some interesting projects, who can talk about all of this stuff. But we also want to just encourage debate. So it's a room of about 50 people, and we'll just have a proper debate about what's going on in the industry. The next one after that, so on October the 19th, we'll visit BBC Research and Development, so you get to actually experience inside BBC R&D, but same idea, group of people, debate, meet people who are writing the standards, and then have a beer with them, and you can help to change this industry. So have a look at our website, SMPTE United Kingdom. Those are the first two events, but there's plenty more to follow after that. We're going to do it once a month. So that's how you can participate. Let's talk a little bit, Bruce, about what happens when people start to incubate these ideas and how SMPTE's beginning to try to pick the pace up.
So the whole industry has been in a state of disruption for about 3 or 4 years now. And that the way that we work and the way that we design stuff has changed dramatically. If you could put the RIS slide up. And one of the thoughts that SMPTE had was, we've got the standards, which is like the pointy propeller head end of the writing stuff down. And to be perfectly honest, watching paint dry is a welcome relief after a day of bashing out standards. And at the other end, we've got the pub talk and the visits that we do to people's sites, which is kind of what the sections do. But there was that middle ground that SMPTE wasn't very active in. So we thought what would be good if we could get a group of people interested in a particular blue sky area. In this case, it's on-set virtual production. Can we get a group of big, medium, and small companies that comprise the technologists designing the technology, the end users who are going to use that technology, and then the operators who are kind of halfway between the two, who have to press the buttons that I badly designed, so that the person who's the talent can then stand in front of all of this stuff and look good. Because there's a whole bunch of new problems that we have today that we didn't have back in 1960 when we were doing this. Specifically, if you look at the top picture there, that's supposed to show LED walls and using things like Unity games engines with camera tracking so that as you move the camera around, the image on the screen moves commensurately with the camera, so the actor feels like they're really there. And if you've not seen this for real, search YouTube for behind the scenes at The Mandalorian and watch the 5-minute video there, because it really shows how it not only makes the whole production much cheaper, but you're now doing effectively VFX in the camera. You're getting better performances out the actors because they actually feel like they're somewhere exotic rather than the back lot of a car park in Los Angeles. And just about everything about it makes it better and cheaper. Unfortunately, it only works with one brand of camera and one brand of LED and one LED controller and one slightly gaffer taped together thing that was glued on the back of the camera for that one set, and one guy called Bob who knows how to make the Unity engine work. So it'd be nicer if we could actually join together more of this stuff. And this group, the Rapid Industry Solutions Group for on-set virtual production, is the first of our Rapid Industry Solutions, where we're trying to figure out what is it you need to do to make a true multi-vendor ecosystem. But it's not just the people selling the kit, it's the people using the kit. So if you are a strongly opinionated person, because SMPTE loves strongly opinionated people, I'm not, of course, it's just everyone else. And if we can get them together in a room and figure out what it is we need to plug this stuff together, we think this will go well for the industry. And we've got plans for 6 or 7 other rapid industry solution initiatives after that. But the goal really is to make this like a separate working group that sits kind of in between the pub lunch sections and the standards, which I love to chair. Sorry, I love to chair.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, so you've heard a bit about standards, you've heard a bit about how you could participate in standards, you've heard a bit about education, you've heard a bit about the UK section and how you can participate in that. Why don't you take a little bit of time, Ian, to talk a little bit more about cloud? Because we're here at this show and it's a very relevant topic.
Yeah.
You brought some slides with you, didn't you? Why don't you take the clicker and just spend a couple of minutes just talking through the training course that you run in cloud? Because I think this is a very relevant kind of just snapshot of the kind of things that SMPTE does in terms of education.
Yeah, I think the points that Bruce makes are excellent because, I mean, a lot of our industry is based on standards. It all got blown apart when the prospect of the cloud came. Everybody was, sort of operating in a proprietary way. And I mean, I deliberately put this business case aspect up because, I mean, there are sort of 5 areas, on-demand consumption pricing, fast development cycles, a variety of deployment and service models, rapid scaling up and down, and infrastructure application flexibility. Now, if I was being optimistic and if I was selling cloud provision, I'd say you want that. If I was being a little bit of a realist, I'd actually be making the kind of points that Bruce is making about interoperability, what happens when I want to port to another cloud vendor, what happens when I want to take a microservices development and port it onto another infrastructure type or platform. It all starts to become a little bit complex there. But basically, anyone who is dealing with major media workflows or playbooks is faced with the prospect of a boardroom that's driven by one of those 5 factors. So, I mean, the next port of call, really, you wanted to say something.
I just wanted to say something. Yes, they're driven by the boardroom who wants to get there without actually knowing what any of the words on that diagram mean.
Yeah, very, very true. I didn't want to be rude to the audience. I'll just leave it to the technologists to be rude.
My job as scapegoat one is to draw the ire away so that you can have the glory.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I don't know how to respond to that, except hide in the slides and click through. So, I mean, it comes down to familiar ground for us. So, I mean, if you're talking about the technology, a big area that most of the cloud providers will say they've got it licked is in content ingest. If you start sort of looking at that, JPEG XS, direct interconnect, trying to get stuff into the cloud is quite difficult. even if it's a file, it's still quite difficult. So there's a lot of interoperability associated there. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you to death, but I'm just going to give you a quick idea of all of the technology areas. So, I mean, compression has a part. I actually gave up a fantastic opportunity to write a compression course for SMPTE because actually I thought the cloud was more relevant and the compression course could wait. Because actually I viewed that the issue about compression is a subset of the cloud. Then you've got things like switching. One of the things that if you hunt deep in this exhibition hall, you'll see that there are a lot of people who are using some quite sophisticated techniques to actually switch video over COTS-based infrastructure. And then you've got things like software-defined networks, where most of the media operators are saying, this orchestration and automation that's used in an enterprise environment is not really media aware. We need, sort of our own applications to actually run it. And you can go on, so the orchestration and automation, you then get on to things like sort of some of the network techniques. And really all I'm trying to get across with all of these sort of techniques is that there are a huge range of supporting technologies that you really need to be aware of to actually enable media usage of the cloud. And I mean, that's where you get onto the standards point. And I mean, Bruce's remit is clearly about SMPTE, but I mean, it's part of a wider ecosystem. So you've got things like encapsulation, and I always get told off here because whenever I start using some technical terms, Bruce here says, no, Ian, that is not the right word to use. So
I'll put my grammar police in a bucket for today.
Okay.
Go for it, mate.
So I'm going to go hastily on because I realised that I was in dangerous territory where I was going to use the wrong word. But we'll talk about things like SD2110, things like precision time protocol. How do you actually time this kind of stuff in the cloud? RIST. If you want to know about reliable internet transfer across enterprise networks, you're really looking at what RIST, SRT, and ZXI are doing. You're, of course, interested in the compression schemes. Again, another one of SMPTE. We've got to bow and scrape because, I mean, SMPTE has put a lot of work into this. And then you get, sort of Dash and some of the stuff that's a bit closer to the consumer. NIST, all of the cloud-based technologies where they're actually working essentially in the enterprise domain, but getting your stuff to actually go across the enterprise domain is pretty crucial. And I'll leave you with a thought that all of those standards really are worth nothing if there isn't best practice. So if there isn't best practice in things like search and discovery of devices, who the hell wants to plug in what devices you've got on what IP port? Search and discovery is a really interesting point. The Movie Lab's recommendations, everyone says we want to ingest our stuff up into the cloud and have it as a central point to actually work on. But there's an awful lot of best practice that you actually need to adhere to actually make this stuff work. And then lastly, the security areas. You don't get very far talking about cloud-based media without somebody asking about security. And I'll leave you with one thought on the security area. If you're within a cloud provider's domain, it's their livelihood, it's their lifeblood that depends upon the security in that context. But there are two things that you need to understand is, first of all, they've got a very tight service level agreement that defines what they like to carry on their cloud, and frequently media applications are outside of that. And secondly, whether you like it or not, this industry dips in and out of cloud-based provision and on-prem provision as is necessary for specific bits of functionality. And it's typically at those trust boundaries where you really get the breaches of security. Now, have I spoken too much or am I allowed to continue?
You can continue and show them on the next slide.
Until my next slide, okay. All right. So just to give people an idea, I mean, I didn't go to as posh a university as Bruce. What was that word you used? Oncology, wasn't it?
Oncology, yes. And that's not the cancer department. That's something completely different.
Okay. So I'm a bit thicker, and I went to a university by the seaside, and I'd call that nomenclature and graphical user interfaces. Is that fair, is it?
That's fair.
Okay. But just to give you a kind of idea of the things, I mean, I've just started doing this cloud course, And we set the slides, we set some little quizzes, and what I do is for each week I actually set them a challenge and an assignment. And I mean, in this case, I was asking about a standardized approach to cloud adoption has yet to emerge for media applications. And what I was really trying to do, I mean, bearing in mind this was the first week of this course, is actually trying to get people to give me their ideas of what they thought needed to be standardized. And I thought the list of all of these points, I mean, bear in mind this was actually the output of a very limited number of students, about 5 students on this course. They were thinking about things that would, be quite obvious, things like infrastructure security and content piracy, but they did get onto the graphical user issue, the portability of applications that you've got running across different cloud environments, the vendor deployment approaches, trying to actually standardize it so that what Bruce was talking about, you can actually run something in AWS and run it into Google Cloud. Tighter key performance indicators appropriate for professional video. So, I mean, what they're talking about is the parameters that are missed off on the service level agreements or the performance parameters. You see orchestration come there, trusted platform services. That's a big thing within the enterprise area. People have known blocks that they can actually rely on. So I was quite impressed with this list. And the reason why I put it up there is these are the issues that you need to actually get your head across for the cloud. And part of it's standards, part of it's best practice, and part of it's down to you sort of actually keeping up to date with all of these standards, technology initiatives, and where the industry's going.
Wow. Thank you, Ian. So look, hopefully that's just given you a little snapshot of the kind of stuff that SMPTE does in terms of training. We don't mess about. We're not afraid to go deep, but by the same token, what we're trying to do here is relate the real commercial world to the world of technology. So let's go back around this again. What's SMPTE about? SMPTE is about people participating to build standards for the future, people participating to educate about the future, people participating together. So come along. Come and join us in our meetups in London. Who's going to be there? It's a wide variety of people. We've got students, we've got graduates, we've got apprentices. We've got people who are experienced in their careers, we've got people who are building standards. We've got people who have retired from the industry and have wisdom to share. It's a real cross-section of the industry. But it's deliberately not intimidating, it's deliberately inclusive. And it comes with ample refreshments.
I think that's the big thing. Come and have a beer with us and tell us what you really think. That's what we want to hear.
So thank you, everybody. We'll end it there.